Hi everyone, spooky time is upon us, or has been upon us, depending on how early you like to decorate. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is that we are here to talk about true horror stories that I've heard in the therapy session. Now, for those of you who might not be aware, I am I guess a mental health provider. I guess I am a mental health provider. I don't guess. I know. I am. I promise. I swear. I am a mental health provider, and aside from my no paid job at Psychology for Geeks, I have a paid job where I work with all kinds of people. I love working with kiddos and teens and adults, and unfortunately sometimes I hear these really horrible stories, and because it's spooky season, I thought, hey, maybe I could share some of these stories with you. Now, I don't think there is like a warning that's necessary. Nothing is going to be too gory or too detailed or anything. In fact, you might just decide to stop listening or watching this video because our ideas of horror might be different. But I think this is important for us to discuss, and to me, they're actually true horror stories. Let's see. But I ramble on. I'm so sorry. ADHD brain just takes a lot of side quests. But 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 horror stories I wanted to discuss with you guys. So the first one is I had been working with someone for a very long time, and they told me some of their concerns when it came to their previous experience, whether it was at school or employment or like trying to make friends. And they proposed, hey, perhaps it's something to do with racism. And I was like, hey, it is possible. And here's where the horror begins. I am not the first mental provider that they've worked with, which is just fine. You know, I'm not the best or like the only one, or like I can do everything, you know. It just it really struck me as horrific when he said that his previous provider flat out told them racism no longer exists. And for a professional to say something like that to the client's face or to the person they're working with, it's truly horrific. It's totally invalidating anything they have ever experienced. And even though maybe the provider has never experienced has been, you know, fortunate enough to never experience racism, doesn't mean it no longer exists. So it's just horrific, you guys. That's not a good response. And there's a lot, unfortunately, like with this horror story, we often hear similar horror stories. There are sometimes providers who don't really talk about religion, don't really talk about politics or racism, or they just really remain neutral about everything. And that is sometimes more harmful than actually discussing about these things, because there is so much. And I really don't want to use this as a rant for me to talk about something else that I'm also very passionate about. I'll probably just make a video about it. But religion, racism, discrimination, politics, if that affects the person we're working with, it must be spoken in the therapy session. Even if the person came in with like a slightly different concern that doesn't really deal with it, it still affects them, even though it might be in a, you know, in a non, like, it still affects them, even though it may be not a clear way that it affects them, but it's still there. Now, I just earlier today I was like, I have ADHD, you guys. I have like little fidget toys. Anyway, I have ADHD, so I just tend to work with a lot of neurodivergent folk, and it is a lot of fun. I love it. I try to learn as much as I can to provide the best, you know, therapy that I can. But once again, I hear horror stories from the people that I work with. Anything from clients just hearing whether it is from a therapist or a psychiatrist or anybody else that's sort of like working with them, like through the school or like outside of the school, telling them that they're just not trying hard enough, that they're just being lazy, that they need to try harder, that they don't understand why they just can't do something. And I'm like, your brain can't do it. And sometimes, no matter how hard I try to not say like every other like 5 seconds, I don't even notice when I'm doing it. And I am so sorry for doing that. But also, when I go off on tangents, again, I don't really notice. Whenever I like space out, sometimes I don't really notice. Am I taking medication? Yes. Am I practicing as much mental health building blocks and self-care skills and all that? I am. Does that make my ADHD symptoms go away? No. I still feel like it's very torturous for me to be forced to do something I don't wanna. And that includes a lot of different things. I am exhausted all the time. I am always, thinking about whether or not I am lazy or whether I'm trying hard enough. And to hear from someone who is sort of like creating this safe space for you to say you're not trying hard enough, or why can't you just do this one thing, it is horrific, you guys. That's not what therapy is supposed to be about. And this is why it's so important for mental health providers to be aware. If they don't really understand whatever the person is discussing, maybe referring them out to someone else is a better way of handling the situation, as opposed to creating more harm and creating these horror stories of people just feeling invalidated whenever they go seek help. So yes, truly horrific, you guys. I am so sorry about my dogs. I just started recording not too long ago and they decided to make a fuss. I am not a licensed mental health provider yet. I am a registered psychological associate. I just had this sort of like flashback, because this is something that I have to say every time I meet with someone new. And usually my spiel goes like, I am a registered psychological associate, and that means I have graduated, but I don't have my license. I'm working on under someone else's license, and blah blah blah. Anyway, once you are a licensed professional, you are basically no longer need to be supervised by anyone. Sometimes people choose to seek out consultation, especially if it's like a difficult case and they don't really know where to go with it, which is great. Highly encourage that. However, sometimes we hear, once again, horror stories about licensed clinicians or mental health providers who are doing things that are rather unethical. Now, everybody has a slightly different board. For me, it is APA or whatever it stands for. But like no, I cannot. My brain cannot think, you guys. It's a marriage and MFT, marriage and family therapist. Or like social workers, they all have like their own board that they respond to. And for the most part, a lot of like the ethical and like the compliance and all this stuff, they're all very, very similar. But sometimes there's people out there who are like, well, I'm licensed, I know everything, I passed the test, I've been in this field for a very long time, so I don't really have to abide it. Or maybe they just don't understand, or maybe they just kind of forgot that it might be a little bit unethical. But it can be, I just heard horror stories, not only from my the people that I work with, but also like colleagues and supervisors and stuff. Sometimes I hear of people who are full-on licensed and people that have been practicing for a very long time, doing things that they have no prior experience or training whatsoever, or sometimes not even like an understanding of what it is. And that is really unethical, you guys. Probably should be illegal. Just because let's say I do pass my test and get licensed, right? I can't just all of a sudden start saying, hey, I am providing neuro psych testing or something. I have no idea about any of that stuff. I can't do it. Just because I'm licensed doesn't mean I know everything, or that I'm trained in everything, or that I have experience in everything. This is why it's so important when you are looking for a provider, a therapist or coach or whatever. Ask them what are their qualifications, what's their experience, what do they think, especially if you are neurodivergent. Ask them what they think about being neurodivergent, or whatever it is that you're struggling with, and see if they're the right person to help, because not every therapist is the best fit for you. You kind of have to, I always say, like, just think about it like when you go shopping for clothes. You don't just grab I hope, probably not. Well, okay, this is not my experience, so maybe different for other people, but like sometimes when you go shopping, you don't settle for like the first item that you find, right? Like you continue looking different stores, maybe check the prices, maybe check whether it wants like the quality of the item, or wherever it is. Same thing when you're looking not only for like mental health providers, but like for doctors, lawyers, any expert, anyone that you're trying to sort of like consult or ask for help. Check to see how good of a fit they would be with you. Like, what is it that you are looking for? Because the type of therapy that I do might be a little bit different than what someone might find helpful, or now I just realized that I just went on this rant. But anyway, yeah, it's very, very important for you to look into this, right? Don't just sort of like go with the first person. If you end up doing that and you realize, hey, this is not what I expected, I don't feel comfortable here, go somewhere else, fire them. It's completely okay. I tell my clients all the time, if you don't feel comfortable working with me, you can tell me to my face, you can send me an email, you can call like the main office phone number or whatever and tell them you want to change. That is completely okay, because I'm not gonna force someone to stay working with me if I'm not a good fit. If I'm not gonna be of any help, there is no point in them staying with me. So again, just be aware that not all mental health providers or therapists are created equal, right? I also heard like horror stories about mental health providers who sort of like derail the session and start talking about their own problems. Now, I'm not gonna judge. I don't completely know. Some people feel comfortable, some people are okay with it, some people are not. My own sort of like type of communication, again, neurodivergent brain, the way that I can connect with you and can explain things is by giving you an example. And oftentimes I just find it easier for me to be like, hey, listen, so the other day I was trying this thing out, you might find it helpful. Like the other hand, I'm just like holding my leg, and this one is just kind of like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, anyway, so yeah, they're making the session about them, right? Not good. If they talk a little bit about sort of like their personal experience, or they give you an anecdote here and there, fine. I think it's okay. I think like being neutral about everything sometimes gets it's really difficult to connect with someone who won't choose a side either way. And like I oftentimes I have been on both sides of the chair, right, as a therapist and as a client. So in both times I have disagreed, right? Personal opinion, or just I don't really understand where they're coming from, and that's completely okay, as long as the person who you're there to try to figure this out is trying to help, right? I mean, not making the whole session about them, because this is your time. This is your session, and if you again find that that's not something that you like, great, now you know. So make sure that you let your therapist know, or whoever you're working with now, or later, if you're choosing therapy later or seeking therapy later, let them know, hey, I don't like it when therapists do that, and that's completely okay for you to do. And if the therapist is like, oh, I'm so sorry, that's just the way I communicate, or that's how I relate to people, then perhaps considering finding another therapist might be the way to go. Wait, I think I skipped some of them. Okay, so the other one is sometimes I work with people, and again, I always like to ask, if this is your first time, because I provide a slightly different view of therapy, or like the way I describe therapy is a little bit different if it's the first time that someone has ever reached out to therapy, as opposed to like like the fifth time, or they had like a therapist for a very long time, because they're sort of like more or less aware of the process. I then just go off and explain what I do in session to see if that's something they would like to continue with or dealing with, I guess. However, sometimes I ask, like after I ask, is this your first time reaching out for therapy? And if they say no, I say, hey, can you tell me a little bit about what your therapy was before? What are some of the things you like, some of the things you didn't like? That way I make sure to either avoid them, and again, once again assess if we would be a good fit. Unfortunately and horrifically, I hear these horror stories of them saying, I don't really know what I learned in the previous therapy. Like, I don't remember learning any skills, because sometimes I'm like, I don't want to assume things, so I say things along the lines of like, you may be familiar with like self-care skills, or like in your previous therapy sessions maybe they discuss all these skills, or like to combat your depression or anxiety or whatever it may be. And sometimes they say, no, I didn't learn any skills when I went to therapy. And I'm like, my brain is just sort of like not fully understanding, because I'm like, yes, sometimes you don't necessarily learn a skill in therapy, but you should. According to me, you should learn ways in which you can modify, whether it's your behavior, your thought process, the way that you communicate, the way that your environment is, the way that you connect with other people, because sometimes that's what's causing problems. And if you went to therapy for an X amount of time and didn't really learn any skills, then that's horrible. And I'm like, what were you doing in therapy? I just wanted to make sure that I was sort of like talking about things that people were interested in, so I just kind of googled it real fast before I started like recording this. And unfortunately, yes, I saw online a lot of people talking about how their own therapist, they didn't really feel like they made progress, and then their provider said, you are not making any progress, it's sort of like your fault that this is happening. And then I'm like, no, I said like again, no, that's not how any of it works.
I don't think so, pal. That's not how this works.
If the person that you're working with doesn't seem to be showing any improvement, then you have to backtrack and assess and analyze and be like, okay, what's not working? Is it what we're doing? Is it what we're not doing? Is it like something else? Like I mentioned before, sometimes it has to do with politics, sometimes it has to do with religion, racism, economy. It's just something that we have no control over, but it still heavily affects us. And so those are things we need to consider. And if the thing is like, well, we can't really figure it out, maybe once again it's time to seek a second opinion. And this is something that the provider should be suggesting, right? Because once again, we can't just be like, well, you're not doing what I told you to do, therefore it is your fault that you're not making any progress. No. We have to figure out, is there something in the lifestyle that prevents them from doing quote unquote homework? I call them cyclists, they're much better than homework. Just gives me like the like PTSD symptoms when I think about homework. So if they're not able to do or practice these things that are discussed in session, then we have to figure out a way to make it happen, whether it's getting setting up a body double, or maybe changing the expectations. Like there's so much like we can do. We can't just sort of be like, yeah, well, you're not really making any progress, so I think I'm just gonna like terminate you. And sometimes I hear the opposite, say, hey, I think you're good to not come to therapy anymore. I don't understand. I have heard these horror stories from another provider in which they said something along the lines of, well, you understand everything you're going through, so I don't think, you know, you need any help. And I'm like, they wouldn't come to you if they got it all figured out. Just because someone intellectually understands what's going on doesn't mean they're able to deal with it, or that their emotions are sort of like on the same page as their intellect. There's so much you have to consider. You can't just be like, well, you understand your problems and you know a way to like figure them out and solve them, so go forth and do it. You don't really need help anymore. And I'm like, sometimes people don't have any support outside of their therapist. So if they come to you because they need like a safe space to talk about these things, even if it's like over and over again, but you again, you notice that they're making some progress, then that's completely okay. That's what therapy is. It's for, sometimes they just need like, you know, that validation or that support until they're able to innately, you know, do it themselves, or they find a community to help them out with it. So yeah, horror stories, you guys. This is I am talking a lot more and a lot louder than I usually do because I am horrified by these things happening. And yes, have I probably made this mistake along like my journey? Yes, I am trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's why I'm making this video, right? To make sure that whichever side of the chair you're sitting on, you're kind of like aware of these things happening and doing something to prevent it. Because again, they're truly horrific things that we don't really want anyone to experience. Let's see. I think there was one more. Yes. So, you know, I talked a little bit about, you know, mental health providers. I talk a little bit about mental health providers saying, oh no, you're lazy, or blaming you for certain things. I've also heard horror stories about them not believing. Well, I mean, like earlier I said, you know, somebody said, oh no, I don't really believe that there's racism out there, therefore whatever you say is not true, like completely invalidating the person's experience. But sometimes it goes even further, in which they're saying, hey, I don't think you're depressed because you're able to do X, Y, and Z, or because you're functioning. I don't think like you're really like experiencing all of this because you're still able to go to work and, you know, be a parent or a sibling or whatever it is that, you know, you do in your life. That's how any of that works again. And then so again, this sort of like this lack of understanding sometimes from the provider and completely invalidating people. Have I sometimes had to correct people? Because sometimes there are a lot of people that come to therapy thinking, hey, I think maybe I might be autistic, or I might have ADHD, or I might have, you know, X, Y, or Z. If I disagree with them, I say, hey, I don't think it's necessarily this one thing. Here are my reasonings for believing things. Let's talk about it more, right? But I don't just go like, nah, you're wrong. You're good to go. I don't do that. And I'm like, here, you know, let's figure it out. This is we're working together kind of thing. This isn't you're here to sit down and listen to what I have to say and follow everything I say. No, this is a team effort, or at least that's how I see it. And once again, it just kind of goes back to regardless of which side of the chair you're on, having that understanding of what you're expecting and what you do not like, and speaking up about it, right? So if you go and, you know, to a therapist and they tell you, I don't think you're depressed, I don't think you're anxious, and they don't really give any sort of like reason for that, they just totally invalidate, you know, your own experience. Because I could easily say, hey, you know what, I don't think going through or like experiencing a hurricane or a tornado is, you know, PTSD worthy. Maybe for some people isn't, but for others it might. I can't just say it and be like, no. Or I can't just be earlier I said that, you know, I connect with people by talking about my own life, or like, you know, connecting or finding something in my own sort of life that I'm like, oh, I've experienced that, so I kind of have this understanding. I can't just be like, well, you know, I've been through a hurricane, and I didn't get any PTSD, so therefore whatever you experience is not as bad, so you don't have that. No, you can't do that either. And I hope this isn't something that's happening. So again, horror stories, you guys. And I really debated whether or not I should create this video, because in part of me is like, well, am I talking bad about my own profession? And I'm like, no, I think these, once again, I think these are things that we need to talk about, right? People need to be aware of to avoid doing them, whether you're like sort of like a new therapist, and if you've done this before, then, you know, talk to your supervisor, do some you know, consultation with someone else if, you know, you're already licensed and don't really have a supervisor, because I think these are important things that prevent people from asking for help, and that's horrible. That's not good, especially when you're in a helping profession, you know. Anyway, I hope you found that helpful. I would like to hear, well, actually no, I would not like to hear more horror stories, but I think it is, once again, very important for us to talk about these things. So if there was something that you experienced or somebody that you heard, why don't you go ahead and write it in the comments so other people are aware of what could happen in the therapy session. And again, whether you are on either side of, you know, of the chair table. It's really late, you guys. My brain's no longer working anymore. Regardless of, you know, whether you're the client or the mental health provider or the, you know, whatever. I think it's important for you to understand these things, and, you know, not everyone, we're human, we all make mistakes. So if I accidentally take over the session and talk too much about myself, let me know, right? And just as I encourage you to let your provider know, your therapist, if, you know, there's something that they're doing that you don't really enjoy. If you don't feel comfortable telling it to their face, do the same thing that I do, you know, or that I ask my clients. Send them an email, send them a text, leave them a voicemail, tell someone else in the office that you feel a little bit, you know, more comfortable with. But I think this is important feedback that we all need as providers to make sure that we are improving. So yeah, write your horror stories in the comments. That way we try to make sure that this is not a thing that is happening anymore. And blanking out again. Okay. We have lots of things planned for Psychology for Geeks, so please make sure to subscribe to our channel. Please make sure to give us a like, write a comment, you know, even if it's like little hearts on LOL, or like, yeah, I agree with you, or whatever it is. That really helps the algorithm. That way we make sure that this is reaching the people that it really needs to reach. And also, because if you follow us or subscribe to us, you'll be sort of like updated as to what is happening with Psychology Psychology for Geeks. We are doing a lot of changes in the next few months, so I highly encourage you guys to check out our website. And join our Discord group. We're doing tons of fun events in our Discord. So yeah, make sure everything is sort of like linked in the description below. But yeah, make sure to check out like our online communities, so you don't miss any of the really cool events that we have later on. Thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I hope you found it helpful. And I hope you were lucky enough to not experience any of these things when you went out to seek help. Yeah, so don't forget to reframe and re-enchant your life, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.